Hello, curious minds. Welcome back to the new session of this wonderful journey of becoming a generative AI professional. We will skip the recap of the journey so far, which is on your screen, and I would request you to please refer to the links in the description to see what we have covered in our previous sessions so far. In this session, we are going to have a simple introduction to Jupyter server and its configuration in a sensible way. As always, we will keep things simple and sensible to lay a very strong foundation for developing data science and machine learning programs and eventually becoming a complete Gen AI professional. So in this session, let's get started with Jupyter and how to work with it. So since we have completed our Anaconda installation, you can see that in our recently added program, there are a list of tools that have been added as part of the installation. The very first tool that we are going to look at in this particular tutorial is the Jupyter Notebook. So let's click Jupyter Notebook, and while Jupyter is starting, let me give a quick recap of what Jupyter allows us to do. A Jupyter notebook is like a Python program. There is a little different because these programs are written into a web browser of your choice, and the reason the web browser is used for coding is because in data science we are going to deal with a lot of data, and visualization is a very important part to understand what our data is. So unlike other editor and other programming environments, in Jupyter Notebook, what you are going to see is the code and the output right into your web browser. Alright, our Jupyter Notebook or our Jupyter server has started, and you can see that it is pointing to the local host. What you would want to do at this time is you go to File menu, New, and you create a notebook. Again, a notebook is just a simple program, Python program. You can see Jupyter has created a notebook called Untitled 5. We can also see that the Jupyter is asking us to select a kernel. Now, this is a jargon here, right? What is a kernel? A kernel is a runtime Python program which allows us to execute the Python code that we are going to write. At this time, since we just started our Jupyter server, we do not have any kernel running. So that's why Jupyter is asking us to select a kernel. Let's select it. Now to get you acquainted with with the initial screen of Jupyter, this particular thing is called as a code cell, and this is where you write the program. Now we are going to write a simple line of code, the world famous hello world. Right? And the way to run the code in Jupyter Notebook is by selecting the cell and hitting this run button. You can see the shortcut in the tooltip as well. The shortcut to run a cell is Shift Enter. This is a cell. A line of code is a cell. But what we want to know at this time is a cell need not have only one line of code. It can have more than one line of code. If I create a small loop for in range is a function which is provided by Python. You can just print I, and you just run it, right? I just did a control enter or a shift enter to do it. So you can see that here it has printed hello world 0 1 2 3 4. So what it means is in a code cell you can either have a single line of code or you can have a multiple line of code. To include a new cell, you can click the plus button, or you can see in the pop-up menu the shortcut to do this is a B for below. If you press that, now if I type B here or capital B here, it is not going to create a new cell below even though shortcut is B. So the way you are going to do it is on your laptop you have to press the escape button. I'm going to press the escape button, and let's observe what happens here. Right, the cursor is out of the code cell now, and now the Jupyter notebook is a command mode. Now if I press B, it will quickly insert a cell below. One more time, B, there you go, B, there you go, right? To delete the cell in command mode, you have to press D, 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 and again D, D. There you go. So I'm in command mode. My cursor is not blinking inside a cell. So I have to press escape, command mode. Let's insert a new cell by pressing the button B. There you go. Now the next thing that we would want to understand in Jupyter Notebook is that now we are able to execute the notebook with the default configuration. However, when you want to be working as a professional, you would not be using the default location, and that's where you should understand what is how to change the default configuration in the Jupyter notebook. So in your existing notebook, if you create a new cell using the plus icon or by just typing the word B, the key B, then it will create a new cell for us. All right. And if I just write here pwd, which means present working directory, I can run the cell using the play button, or I can just hit control enter or shift enter. So when I do a control enter, it says that the current directory where this untitled 5 is running is C user admin. Okay. If I go to my Windows Explorer and if I go to C user admin, okay, then you can see that there are directories that basically this is my home directory, and you can also see our notebook right over here, untitled5.ipynb. Let's switch to the browser, and if we go to the home tab, you will see my home directory, right? 3D object, Anaconda 3, Android Studio project, the very 3D object, Anaconda 3, Android Studio projects, and so on and so forth, right? Now, as you would have expected, this home directory will contain anything and everything in your machine, and that goes for your, let's say, project machine as well. So you do not want to create your notebooks in the default directory or the home directory. You want to set up a new directory where you can create projects in a much cleaner way. So that is what we are going to do now. Let's say instead of creating the projects in my default directory, I want to create it in altogether a new directory. On this directory, let me create a new folder, and the name of folder can be, let's say, my data science projects. Okay. So this my data science projects is the place where I want to store all my project. I also want to make sure that whenever my Jupyter notebook is started, then instead of it pointing to the home directory, which contains a clutter of files, I want it to point to my projects directory. So what we have to do for that is, first we will close the window, we'll close the Jupyter notebook. You can directly click it by closing it, or you can even shut down it. So as of now, your Jupyter is now closed. You will go to the start menu, type Jupyter again, and this time instead of starting the Jupyter, you will right click and say open file location for your shortcut. So your shortcut is in the start menu. Next thing you will do, right click, properties, and you can see the target. If we copy it, it's not readable right over here, and let me paste it into a notepad. You can see that the last parameter of this command is the user file, which actually is directing the Jupyter server to read the home directory, and whatever folders and files are present, show it over there. The default directory is our user profile, and we want to change it to, let's say, this directory, which is s colon my data science project. Let me copy the path here, and we'll just paste it here, and let's copy this whole command one more time. Let's paste it here, and all we are going to do is we'll cut this path, and instead of pointing the Jupyter server to user profile, we will point it to our directory. Now two important things, you will have to replace backslash with a forward slash. Make sure that your path is ended with a forward slash. So we are changing the command from user files to our projects folder. Let me copy this whole command and let me put it into the Jupyter Notebook properties window. Okay, let's paste it. We can see that the path is changed here. Let's apply and say okay. Now if we start the Jupyter server, then hopefully it will start from our projects directory instead of the default directory. Okay, and whenever you get a chance, try to see this configuration variable. It contains some good information all the time. Okay, now you can see here that there is a blank screen, blank home, because our Jupyter is actually started from the directory that we created, which is the data science project. No directories here. You can go to new and you can say new folder. Actually it should be here as well. Okay, somehow it is not showing new folder here, but you can say new folder and you can call it project 01, right? So this is my first project. You can also check, if you go to Windows Explorer, you can see that project 01 is now created here, which is the same thing that we created from the server. Second thing that you want to do is that, let's say I have one more project which is called project 02, project 02. Okay, you can see it coming up here. Hopefully new folder is here and project 02 is here, right? You don't have to do anything, the server will refresh on its own. So now we have two projects, project 1 and project 2. With this we are able to change the default location for our Jupyter server to a cleaner location. We can create the directory structure as we want, right? And we can create the notebooks inside it as well. So let's go to project 1 and let me create a folder called, let's say, no, my notebooks or notebooks, right? You can also have a folder called, let's say, images. I'm just putting an example here, right? What the point that we are trying to understand here is, we are actually creating a nicer, cleaner directory structure for our whole project. If you go back to Windows Explorer, inside project 1, you can see images and notebooks folder has been created. Now let's navigate to notebooks. Let me create my first notebook here. So right click, notebook. By default it will create with the name of untitled.ipynb. When you create the notebook first time, then you can see that it is asking select the kernel for untitled.ipynb. So it is asking select your kernel for this notebook. Now before we proceed further, we would want to know what exactly is a kernel. A kernel in a Jupyter notebook or in a Python environment is the runtime environment. This is the run configuration, runtime memory, which will hold all your variables, all your program when you execute it. Okay, so as of now, what we will do, since this is our first notebook, we can see that there is the kernels that are available to us is Python 3, which is our default kernel. And then if you see this option, use kernel from other session, there is nothing being populated here as of now, because there is only one notebook which is running and the name of that notebook is untitled.ipynb. So we will select the default for a moment and we will say select and start using the kernel. Now what we can do here is, let me create a variable called my variable, or let's say my prj project 01 notebook 01 variable, and let me assign is a value as this is a variable in project 01 and in notebook nb and in notebook nb01, right? We haven't renamed the notebook yet, but we will rename it. Let me just print it, print my variable. Let me copy this and paste it, and let me run it with control enter or shift enter, whatever you like. So this is printed. Let's save the notebook, and instead of saving it as untitled notebook, let's rename it to notebook 01. Okay, so where is this notebook? This notebook is within the project 1 directory. Okay, you can of course check it on your Windows Explorer as well. Project 1 notebooks, and here is your notebook that you just renamed notebook 01. Okay, now what we are going to do to understand the power of kernel, right? We can go back to home directory, we can navigate back to our root where the project 02 is present. I can go to project 02. This is altogether a separate project, let's say, right, in a practical world. But project 1 and project 2 has to interact with each other, and they have to exchange the variables as well at the time of execution. So what we are going to do to achieve that, we will create a notebook, a sample notebook here, right? Let me call it. This is again a default untitled notebook which is getting created. And now here comes the interesting part. When it says select a kernel, remember that you have a notebook which is running already, and it has a kernel where you have created a variable and printed the value for it as well, right? Now if you go back to this, and if you drop down the option, unlike the last time, you can see that the server is now offering us to use a kernel from the other session, which is the notebook 01 from the project 01 folder, right? So either I can create a new kernel, a new runtime environment, or I can reuse the existing. And we will see that when we reuse the existing kernel, then it will mean that the variables or everything which is declared in this kernel will be visible in the other kernel as well. But before we know the power, let's see with the default kernel that what happens when we try to use a variable from the other notebook. So my existing kernel, you can see here on the right top as well, is the IPython kernel, right? You can always change the kernel by clicking on this. Let me rename this file first, right, so that we don't get confused. This is my notebook 02 in the project 02. Okay, let's save it. Switch kernel. You can see I have two kernels running now, notebook 01 and notebook 02, because I did not reuse the kernel, right? Let's cancel it for a moment. And what we will do, we will try to print, we'll just copy this print statement, and this variable is declared in notebook 01. We will try to make use of it in notebook 02 without even declaring it. As expected, probably what will happen is Jupyter will complain that notebook variable, let me zoom in, notebook variable with the name my project 01 nb01 is not defined, obviously. Now we have a requirement where we want to make use of the variable that are present in the other notebook. So all we have to do is we go back to the kernel, you change the kernel to nb01 and say select, right? And given that now our kernel is now pointing to the kernel of notebook 01, if we try to run this cell, we are now able to access the variable from the other notebook. So the conceptually it may look as simple, but it has enormous power when you are going to build projects with multiple notebooks, right? So all of this directory structure that we have seen and the power of kernel will help you build a nice and cleaner project structure as we progress further. Okay, it will seldomly happen that you will have just one notebook where you will write, let's say, 10,000 line of code and expect it to run smoothly. Instead, you would want to have a modular design where one part of notebook deals with one business functionality and the other notebook deals with the other functionality. And at the same time, both notebooks are able to interact with each other, right? So that's where you would want to make use of kernel by reusing the existing kernel instead of creating the new kernels. With this, we will wrap up the current session, and in our next session, we will see the visualization power that Jupyter Notebook provides us that will also put our feet in the machine learning world. Stay tuned everyone, and the journey keeps getting more interesting.